Hi everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present at the Urban Forestry Days. Cecil and I have prepared a short and hopefully thought-provoking talk on how urban forestry is going global and the different pathways influencing this process. I will be giving the talk, which perhaps due to time zone differences, I'm based in Vancouver, will reach you in the form of a video, while Cecil will be there to answer your questions at the end of the talk and engage in what I hope will be an exciting discussion. We know that as the world continues to rapidly urbanize, the greatest sustainability challenges we're going to face this century will be urban. And urban challenges are not restricted really to the physical boundaries of cities, but reach far beyond. For example, our agricultural and industrial activities are having an impact on rural landscapes, and urbanization is increasingly having an effect on forested landscapes around the world. Of course, these challenges are also hitting cities, where we see issues of intensification of traffic and air pollution, intensification of overconsumption, and increased vulnerability due to things like poverty and inequality. We also see differentiated exposure and vulnerability to more frequent and extreme weather events linked to climate change, such as floods and wildfires. Now, the thing is, if cities are really the root cause of so many problems, they are certainly also part of the answer and the pathway to multiple solutions. This is really what motivated Cecil, myself, and a group of colleagues to embark in a research project some years ago, looking at the effect that cities may have on different sustainable development goals and the social, economic, as well as biophysical targets that we humans have committed to achieve within the next decade. To do this, we assess possible synergies and trade-offs between the Sustainable Development Goal 11, the urban SDG, and the other 16 SDGs. Most of you may be familiar with SDG 11, but just in case as a refresher, the goal of this SDG is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And it comprises 10 targets, which I have listed here. So we started first by looking at all the global efforts that were in place to monitor SDG 11 implementation, which included the SDG tracker of the United Nations and looking at all of the voluntary national reviews that were submitted to the high-level political forum on sustainable development. And one of the things that we found in general is that there was a lack of consistency when it came down to data collection. So some targets were better tracked than others, for example. There was also no common methodological procedure that voluntary national reviews had to follow. We saw that each country used a different method and different template to complete the reviews, which made our systematic assessment quite challenging. We also looked at city-level global monitoring efforts, and here, of course, we run into a different challenge, and that is that different cities have different contexts and history, legacies that influence the way in which they are uptaking SDG 11 and the implications it can have on the other SDGs. So we decided to develop this framework that I'm showing you here that helped us better describe the urbanization process of cities considering different dimensions. First, the pace of the urbanization, if it's slow or fast over the last 2 decades, how urbanization is playing out in space, if we're seeing a densification of the urban core or a sprawl, and the level of affluence of a city, which can be low, medium, or high. And I am comparing here 2 cities using the framework. For example, Vancouver in Canada, that is showing fast growth, high level of affluence, and a densifying core, versus Medellin in Colombia, which shows slow growth over the past decades, a low to medium affluence level, and sprawl. The idea of this framework was to give us enough contextual information to characterize cities and case studies that we used in the assessment to better understand how they are prioritizing different SDG 11 targets and the implication this can have for other SDGs. A key finding of this study is that overall there tended to be a bias towards certain targets, where both countries and cities tended to favor targets such as improving housing and basic services, increasing the efficiency of transport systems, improving air quality and reducing waste, while other targets such as increasing safe, inclusive and accessible green and public spaces, as well as the protection of cultural and natural heritage in and around cities, were given less priority. The only targets that were highly prioritized and at the same time had an explicit role for urban nature, based on what we found, were targets aimed at managing disaster risk and increasing urban resilience. And this urban resilience, I believe, encompasses both social as well as ecological resilience. And here we can imagine different resilience pathways. Through urban forestry, we can maintain the basic resilience of a city, introducing practices that can help cope with current disturbances and increased climatic variability. But we can also be more proactive and embark on an adaptive resilience pathway, really thinking of future disturbances, novel disturbances that may be affecting the city, and how we can increase the adaptive capacity of the city through urban forestry to take advantage of these future changes. Or we can think of an even more transformative resilience pathway, where we are really creating the future we want to see, not only building capacity to face future challenges, but also increasing the synergies between SDG 11 and the other synergies, while at the same time minimizing trade-offs. Here I'm showing you a graph that we developed based on the assessment, showing some of the synergies and trade-offs between SDG 11 and the other SDGs through specific targets. The clusters to the right seem to be the most prioritized by cities and countries, with the lower one showing more trade-offs for forests and forest-based livelihoods, while the top one tended to show more synergies. The one to the left, however, I think is gaining attention in more recent years, and it certainly deserves more space within urban agendas in terms of how we can really find synergies around increasing green urban spaces to create opportunities for human health, well-being, and equality. A framework that is gaining global attention in recent years and bringing these synergies to the forefront is nature-based solutions, and the different pathways it envisages through which nature can address societal challenges and synergistically contribute to human well-being as well as biodiversity conservation. And I would say there is an invitation to take a step further and perhaps adopt nature-based thinking, which calls for a paradigm shift in the way we're currently relating to and valuing nature, and then designing the cities we want to see for tomorrow based on that renewed connection between people and nature. Now, you may argue that spreading these ideas to cities across the world is difficult, but what we found through the assessment is that there are already mechanisms in place that can be used as catalyzers of ideas among cities. And these mechanisms entail both international policy processes where intergovernmental organizations support the exchange of ideas and guidelines among cities, as well as city-to-city networks, which have created these peer support systems where cities can pilot new ideas and help each other be catalyzers of change. Recently, Cecil also launched the 330-300 rule, which can be used as a reference by cities around the world in terms of how they can promote urban forests and urban greening to support health and well-being more holistically. And of course, there is no better time to really think of these opportunities than now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is teaching us the important role nature is playing to maintain our social, our physical, and our mental health and well-being, particularly in the context of cities and in times of high uncertainty. I would like to leave you with some provocative thoughts from the perspective of our assessment and more recent work. First, to take a more holistic approach in the way cities are designed and planned. We notice, for example, with the assessment that cities tend to prioritize some targets and goals versus others, leaving behind some missed opportunities. And perhaps a way to take a more holistic approach is to integrate nature-based thinking in the way we reimagine cities with people-nature connections at the core. And the time to really adopt this thinking is now, because COVID-19 is providing an opportunity, an awakening call to strengthen our relationship with nature, particularly in the context of cities. In this regard, urban forestry is going to play a critical role this decade, not only to support the achievement of more synergies within the SDGs, but also to have impact both at the local scale as well as at the global scale. I hope some of these thoughts resonated with you, and perhaps you have some questions for Cecil to answer. If you have ideas or more comments, this is where you can find us. We're always eager to connect. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the event.